For me, one of the joys of home automation projects is building little sensor and actuator modules for my projects. So here's something I built a few years ago during the pandemic. It used to have a particulate matter sensor attached, but that one kind of fell off and broke. It's got CO2, VOCs, temperature, humidity, pressure, the good stuff. And I found this kind of data was really interesting to watch, seeing how air quality varies throughout my house, seeing what areas it might need some improvement, etc. So when AirGradient reached out, offering to send me 2 kits to their open source air quality monitor, I was happy to take them up on that. Mostly because a lot of the sensor elements in this thing are the same ones that I chose to use for my own project a couple of years ago. This one also has seen better days, so I kind of need a new one, and I like having that data. It also works well with Home Assistant, which is something that I use. So today I'm taking a look at these 2 AirGradient air quality meters. So come along on this adventure. So they sent me 2 AirGradients. Let's see what we got in the box. So I've got an AirGradient Open Air and AirGradient 1. So they say they're committed to repairability. I guess we'll evaluate that as well. They are in fact using no plastic in the packaging except for this anti-static bag, so makes sense. So here's the unit. It's got a nice screen there. Doesn't feel very heavy. Got space for mounting a cable to our Type-C in the back. Lots of mounting points, cable routing options. Here's a little paper bag. I'm guessing this has screws in it. A little screwdriver and screws. A right angle USB cable to power it. And the anti-static bag, which has some sensors in it. So this one here is a Sensair S8. I don't recall what this measures. So it looks like we have the plan tower. This is going to be the PM 2.5 sensor. So that's hooked up. It's got a little space here labeled CO2 sensor with a still screen telling me what goes there. This one's labeled SHT1. One's labeled I2C3. That's our ESP32. ESP32C3 Mini. Okay, so sensors are plugged in. Now this case goes on like that. So we just got to screw on the case. Oh, it's a baby Torx. I love Torx. Let's see if you can make out this detail here. So, unlike Philips, Torx does not really strip, so you shouldn't have a problem opening this back up in the future if you were to need to change out sensors or something like that. So here we have the unit assembled. Now for the other one, the Open Air. Okay, so here's everything on the box. We got a base. I believe this is the upper half, wrapped in paper. Yeah, so this will go on top somehow. Got a very long USB-A to C power cable to power this thing. It's probably the plan tower sensor. It's also wrapped in paper. There we go, the plan tower particulate matter sensor. I think this one is the main board. There we go. So main board here, we have the ESP32, some of the IOs, the PM 2.5, looks like there's space for 2 of them. Okay, this is another S8, it's on its own little board. So now I'm going to put this one together. I should probably open the instructions though, shouldn't I? Okay, so this little guy measures TVOC and NOx. He goes in there. So next I'm supposed to screw this in and mount it in that cavity. That looks very nice. Next up it says make sure you put the cable in the right way. I'm actually not sure what the right way is. Okay, so this thing just sits in its little injection molded home. This way. And the board has a little slot to sit in as well. So these cables actually cross over, so instead of going that way we go this way. We are supposed to go through the slot in the board. Okay, so now this thing slides down. It looks like it goes this way. And there's some features in here that will hold in the sensors. Feels like it's not in all the way, but I think it's supposed to have a gap around the outside for airflow. Okay, so we're fully assembled. Got places to mount on the back. We can fish zip ties through, lots of options. Sensors are all underneath, ready for power. Okay, so my 2 AirGradient units are now fully assembled from their partially assembled state, and I'm ready to set them up. So according to instructions, this now means firmware time. So I brought these guys up here to set up the software. I should just have to join them to my Wi-Fi because Home Assistant supports auto-discovery of these things. So they suggest reflashing the firmware to update it. They have a web-based utility that works in Chrome or Edge, so I'm in Edge. Okay, so here we can configure Wi-Fi. I also have the option here to not connect to the AirGradient server, and I like that this is an option. So I'm going to check that, and I'm just going to use Home Assistant. I do really appreciate the option to select or deselect a cloud service, especially for a device like this. Since I'm planning on using it with Home Assistant, I'm going to set it up for Wi-Fi only, and I'll use their cloud service. So now it showed up here in Home Assistant Discovery, so I can just click Configure, and let's set it up. Well, that was super easy, so I'll go through the same process with the other one, and I'll show you where I put them. So now that I've had these guys set up for about a week, let's take a look at what data I've collected. So over here I have the two guys, I9 PSL and O1 PST. It says and your bedroom, but they've actually been moved around quite a lot. I put them all over. So it shows up pretty nicely in Home Assistant here. I've got all the different readings. Carbon dioxide, this one's fun. So right now it's reading about 500 ppm. The normal atmospheric baseline is somewhere around 450 ppm, by the way, just as a baseline. So 500 is not bad. Looks like it went up to 700, 415. That's when we were eating dinner last night, so makes sense. It's in the kitchen right now, so it'll catch that kind of stuff. If I zoom out a bit further, you can see I've got a several day trend here. Went up to 800. I don't know what this is. 10 a.m. If I go back a few more days though, so I go back to, looks like Wednesday, I think. Yeah, so here it went to 5,000. That was someone talking to it. So the sensor has a display in it that shows the current readings. It also has some colors, and they'll change color from green to yellow to red as the CO2 gets worse. And a family member found this out and started blowing on it to try to make it go up. That's why it says 5,000 here. But also unrelated to this 5,000 spike here, you can see it started at around 480 something, and over the course of the day it was going up slowly. And so we had family over, so there were more people than usual in the room. And you can see clearly we went over 1,000. We got up to about 1,100 before the spike, and then slowly over the course of the day it drifted back down to normal. So this is clearly a really good indicator of how much ventilation we need in that space. Now 1,200 is not abnormal, but at around 1,000 you should probably start thinking about introducing some more fresh air into the space. Modern airtight houses already usually have a ventilation system of some sort, and that's quite a bit more efficient than just having a leaky house that has air blowing in all the time. But some really high-end ventilation systems will actually monitor CO2 and increase their fan speed or increase where they're pulling from or things like that based on this number specifically. So it's a really good indicator of how many people are in the area and how much fresh air mixing you need due to those people. Now going back here to the PM, I'm going to look at PM 2.5, and this one spiked, what time was that? 3. Yeah, we were cooking yesterday, so that was definitely some cooking. Now 200 is a really high number, but it makes sense. So it started at around 314, it peaked at 321, and then it was going wild still. So yeah, we were cooking at that time, and I don't know what was happening at 2:30 a.m. I go back like a week here. These trends mostly correspond with cooking. So cooking obviously releases a lot of stuff, and the sensor clearly captures it. This also shows the importance of having a ventilation system in your kitchen. My kitchen does not have one. I have a microwave over the fridge, and the microwave doesn't vent anywhere, it just vents back into the air, so it's not helping anything. And so if you do cooking, I don't have a gas stove, so I don't have carbon monoxide from that. But all of the particulates and chemicals you get into the air from cooking, they'll certainly hang around for a while, and having a ventilation system that vents those outside would be much better. I don't have one though. Temperature is obviously a thing. If I look back at this for, I don't know, a whole week. So there we go. So we're getting temperature readings. It looks like it's pretty normal. The furnace is cycling on and off, doing stuff. People adjust it, it becomes hot, etc. And humidity is relatively constant, and it's actually not that low. So 40 to 35% is pretty good for indoor air. For this particular number, 40 to 50% is usually what you want to target. If you get really high humidity, you get condensation on cold surfaces, which is really bad. If really low humidity, everything dries out and cracks and things like that. Also, people hate low humidity, so normally you don't get high humidity in the winter like I am here, because the moisture capacity of air goes down drastically with low temperature. So by heating the air up, even for the same amount of moisture in the air, the relative humidity percent goes down a lot. So I have a humidifier. It's not a very good one, but it does work, and it keeps it at 35%. Without it, it sometimes gets below 20%, which is really bad. And VOCs. So VOCs do things. I have no idea what the number means, but I'll show it to you anyway. So it must max out at 500 because it got pegged here twice. This one was definitely cooking. We were cooking and it went way up and it stayed there until long after we were done cooking. These two, I don't know, maybe they're cooking as well. It's like we don't have a NOx problem, it's not at 1, so that's good. So that's the data from my inside sensor. Now I've moved it between my bedroom and the kitchen. I get much more interesting data from the kitchen. In my bedroom, though, I can still see CO2 go up and down as I enter and leave, long-term trends. So it's still nice to know. And if you have a closed-off room, I know Jeff Geerling in particular had a problem. I'll probably link to his video up here, maybe in the description. If you have a closed-off room, especially when you're filming and stuff, it can be easy to close everything off so you don't have noise. The CO2 can go way up, and that can cause some problems. So what about the outdoor sensor? Well, the outdoor sensor has a much rougher life. I mounted it on the post of a bench on my front porch. So it's covered, but it still gets wind, sunlight, less so in the winter. We had a snowstorm a few days ago, 2 days in a row. So we've had plenty of cold weather. It's probably got some snow on it, and I have less hope for it to survive due to its hardware construction than the indoor one. Not that the indoor one's constructed any differently, just that the outdoor environment is very harsh, and we'll see how it survived. So again here we have the O1 PST outdoor sensor. The data looks reasonable right now. So we have CO2 at 411, which is roughly the outdoor background or so. If I look at this over time, it shouldn't vary that much. So we'll look at a week. What the heck are you doing? You're not going to jump up on there with my decorations. It's not for you. It's where my lighthouses go. You can't mess up the lighthouse. So initially it had some rough data, it looks like. I'm not entirely sure why it had rough data. And since then it's been much happier. I didn't change anything on any of these days. Also temperature, it's had a bit of a time with temperature. And this is what I mean, this negative 1335 and 7000. So I look back for a week, I think we'll see that a couple of times. Yeah, so occasionally it kind of gets stuck and it's reading negative 1335, which is obviously not the temperature. So I can't really see any temperature trends with this, and I'm not entirely sure what's causing it. So I'm going to go back and reseat all of the sensor connectors after this. So take the unit apart, reseat the connectors, put them back in, make sure they're correct. We'll see if that makes any difference. Home Assistant also doesn't let me rescale the graph, so I can't just like chop it off. Humidity, I believe, has been doing something similar. Yeah, it drops down to 6 when it loses data. So maybe I have a problem with that temperature humidity module. But these numbers are very high. Even though it's very dry out, the relative humidity is still very high because of how low the moisture capacity is of cold air. He would like to be on camera, by the way, so everyone say hi to Sherlock, Mr. Holmes. He's a lead investigator here, an investigative journalist. It's also currently his least favorite season because he hates getting snow on his toe beans, so everyone feels sorry for him. As for other sensors, we have PM. So if I look at this one, it's obviously quite low. It looks like it gets a -1 when it's not working. So as expected, the outdoor particulates are not that high. This, I believe, is when we were setting up Christmas lights. So we were on the porch working with stuff, and it was probably putting out some particulates. And the rest of the time, the particulates aren't that high, which is good to see because it's outdoors. We shouldn't have any smoke, debris, or things like that, hopefully. Looking at this history here, I wonder if the device rebooted at this time. Because it's showing like all the settings changing, but they didn't change. Yeah, so firmware became unavailable 2 hours ago, and then it reset everything to what the values it was. I don't think the other one had that problem. So the last thing I'm going to try with the outdoor one is to power it from a different power brick. I'm just plugged into the wall with a power brick. I could have a cheap power brick or something that can't handle freezing temperatures. So I'll try like a power bank or something for a day and see if that improves it. So that concludes my testing of the 2 AirGradient sensors. So far, I moved this one around inside to see if it would fix its dropout problems. It seems that it's only dropping out for temperature and humidity and none of the other channels, which is interesting to me. At least as long as it's been sitting inside, it hasn't rebooted yet. I'm probably going to put this guy back outside with a shorter USB cord. I'm wondering if that could be causing some voltage drop or something like that. I am a little bit worried about how this will deal with the weather in my area in the summer, especially with bugs, because here things like power outlets, the bugs tend to crawl in them and kind of make a nasty mess. That's of course not the fault of AirGradient, it's just inherent to any weather sensor that it's going to have open holes to measure the weather. One other note about networking for these guys, the firmware for these guys is open source, it's on GitHub. It's based on the Arduino Platform I/O framework. And Arduino has a long-running problem of not supporting IPv6. More specifically, they treat the entire IP library as having one IP address. And this probably made sense like 10 years ago when they were working on super memory constrained 8-bit MCUs. But there's no reason to use an 8-bit MCU in 2024, even an Arduino one. Use some like ARM Cortex-M0 or something. So anyway, if you're into firmware tinkering, there's another GitHub repository that has a full configuration for this whole thing based on ESP Home. So ESP Home is not based on Arduino for ESP8266 and ESP32, and it does support IPv6 properly. ESP Home also supports WPA Enterprise. If you're into that whole thing, you can have a certificate for your IoT devices, which is super nice. So I will probably end up flashing that into these guys in the future, but I haven't done that yet. So anyway, if you want to buy one of these guys, link down below in the description for that. If you want to follow me, like and subscribe, I would love that. I also have a Discord server if you want to chat about Home Assistant, networking, Linux, stuff like that. If you want to give me a tip, I have a Ko-fi link down below for that as well. And as always, I'll see you guys on the next adventure.